9/11 hijackers Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar. So, did these Saudi officials help the hijackers? Around the time he helped the hijackers get settled in San Diego, there was a significant increase in his salary. Wild, man. So the Saudis too, huh? The inferences are compelling in the absence of an alternative innocent explanation for their conduct, which otherwise leads us to support a conclusion of knowing assistance to the 9/11 terrorists. Victory in a 9/11 case still going on, and we're coming up on another anniversary here, and we're asking questions about 9/11. We know our government lies to us about basically everything. Lied to us about COVID, lied to us about immigration, about Biden's mental faculties, about Kamala's mental faculties, lots of things. And it seemingly appears that there are still unanswered questions about 9/11. And a group of people have sued the Saudis on this. The defendant here is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and they filed a motion to dismiss this case, and it has been denied. And so here's some background on this. They say the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia moved to dismiss all claims filed against it in 2004 and filed numerous motions since then. They argued, we're immune. You can't sue us. On September 29th, this court granted the motion to dismiss because they failed to establish a tort. Now, on remand, this court concluded that another allegation of their direct liability, saying that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was directly responsible for this, were insufficient to establish jurisdiction. But they did explain that the nature and the scope of the agency is somewhat unclear in this case, and the best position to shed light on that inquiry is Saudi Arabia. Now, the discovery was aimed at examining whether and to what extent these agents took actions at the behest of Saudi officials to provide assistance to 9/11 hijackers Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar. So, did these Saudi officials help the hijackers? And if so, who were they and what did they do? Magistrate judge supervised this discovery. Well, what did those agencies do? Maybe we do have jurisdiction. After its completion, the judge set forth a protocol for the motions to dismiss briefing. They renewed their motion to dismiss and moved to strike the opposition. Both parties brought motions with 7 expert witnesses, and it's been a battle. They sent these two guys into the U.S., right? The Saudis. Back in 1994, he was employed as a civil servant. He remained there. They sent him into the United States. This guy also came into the United States by Yumi. From 94 to 2002, various education programs. This person, 96 to 2003, held diplomatic status visa. Usman Mada, an employee at King Fahd Mosque, declares that they were hostile toward America and Western culture, and they led a small group of men at a mosque who had extremist anti-American views. It's really nice we let them all in here. It says, then hijackers arrived in LA. So the Saudis have these two dudes here, then the hijackers come in. Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar were 2 Al-Qaeda members who helped carry out 9/11. In 2000, Al-Qaeda sent hijackers in the U.S. to study English and take flight lessons. We're like, yeah, we love foreign exchange students here. Great. According to FBI interrogations of KSM, who was an Al-Qaeda member, these 2 hijackers did not speak much English before they came here, and we taught them it so they could blow us up. KSM states that Al-Qaeda had one in California to help the 2, and he permitted them to go to the local mosque to request assistance. So then they arrived and they met with this dude. On January 15th, the 2 hijackers met with Thumiari. Muhammad Johar, a congregant, testifies he met the hijackers in front of the mosque after they arrived. He brought them into the mosque and introduced them to other people. He states that he told them that these 2 men were newcomers and needed to find a place to stay. Yeah, come to our terror cell. That'd be great. According to the FBI's interview, he stated that they told him to look after these 2 very significant people. Now, there are other Saudi officials. Now, while the parties dispute the political reasons behind the MOIA and their creation, it's undisputed it was created in 1993, and it assumed control over mosques, it vetted sermons and other things. According to the FBI, though, they had provided funding to a terrorist group, and Thumiari controlled the bank account that distributed those funds. Now, Khalid al-Swalam was the head of the Dawah office, lots of, names here, and other head of an affair. This guy left the U.S. for Saudi Arabia shortly before the 9/11 attacks. 5 weeks after the 9/11 attacks, some CIA and FBI agents came to the King Fahd Mosque with a picture of Thumiari and the hijackers. They asked the director of the mosque questions about him. He states he was never aware of this happening. No idea. KSA's Ministry of Foreign Affairs instructed him not to return to the U.S. without further notice. And the king approved his return to the U.S. back in November 28, 2001, and he did return, but the U.S. State Department ultimately revoked his visa finally. So then this other person, Bayoumi, made a trip over to San Diego, and he met the hijackers there too. He stated the purpose of his trip was to renew his and his family's passports. These people converted. During the trip, they met at a mosque. On On February 1st at the consulate, they met with someone else. Morgan also declares that they met here. Hijackers met in LA. Then here's another meeting. The hijackers' time in San Diego. They're at the mosque there. They got assistance with an apartment. Social gathering at the hijackers' apartment. Instructed Morgan to videotape part of the event. All male guests, it's a sausage party over there, because Islamic tradition requires families and unmarried men to be separated. Says that the party was an occasion to honor volunteers at the mosque. Now, as seen from the video, there were 29 people there. It's a lot of dudes. Some of the participants at this meeting had interactions with the hijackers outside this gathering, and the hijackers ultimately left. So Bayoumi traveled to Saudi Arabia. From March, his compensation more than doubled. According to personnel status changes, he explained this increase was for the more work he was doing. Then, while he was in Saudi Arabia, a phone call was placed from a phone number associated with his wife to a number that families claim to belong to this guy, Al-Awlaki. And there was a phone call between Thumieri and a number associated with Al-Awlaki. And Thumieri testifies that he never heard of Al-Awlaki and doesn't remember calling him at all. So this guy's in Saudi Arabia talking to these people. Hijackers lease at their apartment ends. They develop a relationship with Hazmi. Hazmi and Mitter called Johar. The hijackers stayed at a motel. During this time, they visited the Saudi embassy and flew to Saudi Arabia. They also in and out of Yemen and San Diego, Lemon Grove, California. There's a traffic ticket showing that Bayoumi was pulled over by the police at a location miles away from LA, from the mosque. Then they make a video in Washington, D.C. They take a trip out there. Then there's an airplane drawing. The MPS also sees the notepad from his residence in the UK. On one page on the notepad is a handwritten sketch of an airplane with some numbers, calculations, and some notes. Now, Bayoumi states that it is his own handwriting on this page, and regarding the purpose of preparing the document, Bayoumi states that he prepared the document to memorize the equation. So all of that, man, lots of facts. In summary, motion is denied. Parties present dueling narratives on whether and to what extent these agents took actions in 2000 at the direction of Saudis to provide assistance to the hijackers. Okay, it's a dueling narrative. Now, the plaintiffs, they present sufficient facts to support a reasonable inference that their claims satisfy this jurisdictional exception, and KSA does not convince this court that the exception does not apply, and so therefore this court denies the motion to dismiss, and saying they still have jurisdiction over this case, in other words. Saying, now we have to talk about the scope of employment. Can we attribute this to the Saudis? Now, the plaintiffs say that the Saudi government charged these people, Thumieri and Bayoumi, to carry out covert activities to help the 9/11 hijackers. They say they've satisfied the exception. That gives us jurisdiction over them because there's 9/11 laws that said you can go, make claims. KSA argues that no one from the Saudi Arabian government directed them to assist the hijackers, and they did not knowingly assist them in their hijacking. So you have to ask about the scope of the employment, and they're going to do that. They say there is sufficient evidence to raise questions as to the true nature of their employment. Were they working for Saudis or not? When viewed as a whole, the total evidence creates a reasonable inference that their employment was more than what their official job title suggests. They had frequent interactions with the hijackers from January to May and involved important logistical events for the hijackers' settlement into the United States. This is a federal judge writing this. Besides the material assistance Bayoumi himself provided, he also seemed to serve as a connecting point between the hijackers and many other people who had provided assistance to the hijackers at one point or another. For example, Bayoumi knew Thumieri personally and frequented the King Mosque, and they were visiting. All these connections raise questions. Are they employees? Are they just here like doing aviation training or something? No. Additionally, it's undisputed that this one Saudi knew Sadan and Suderi, who worked for the Saudi embassy and took a video of the city with them. And lastly, around the time he helped the hijackers get settled in San Diego, there was a significant increase in his salary. Wild, man. So the Saudis too, huh? KSA and Bayoumi failed to provide a plausible explanation as to why this much increase incurred, and KSA accordingly failed to rebut the logical inference that the pay raise was related to assistance for the hijackers. Now, all this evidence, federal judge, taken together shows that Bayoumi had ties to multiple people working for the MOIA and the Saudi government, and cast doubt on whether Saudi truly sent them to simply pursue studies, which is what they tell us. They're just, researchers from China. I just want to come cure cancer for us. By getting himself involved in the hijackers' preparation for a terrorist attack, Bayoumi appears to have done much more than any typical accountant or data processing tech would do. And it appears that bears some connection with his employment by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Judge, as to Thumieri, the other guy, the court also finds it significant that when tracking the hijackers' traveling path, they chose LA as their initial destination. They also revisited LA and didn't want to live there. It makes one wonder, who in Los Angeles did they hope to see? Or what did they intend to do there? This naturally puts the spotlight on Johar and Thumieri, the two people based in LA that they interacted with. And further, the families provide ample evidence of their numerous phone calls. It also suggests suggests that they were likely employed by Saudi to assist the hijackers and coordinated with these people to some degree. They also had phone calls with the imam and saying they were communicating with the imam about the hijackers. And so all this evidence, says the judge, taken together, creates a strong inference that it is more likely than not, for the limited purpose of jurisdiction, that these two were not just acting as an imam and an accountant, okay? Their employment with KSA likely had some connection to assisting the hijackers. The inferences are compelling in the absence of an alternative innocent explanation for their conduct, which otherwise leads us to support a conclusion of knowing assistance to the 9/11 terrorists. Under New York law, an employer may be vicariously liable for their employees' acts. And so now the question is, what are these people? Are they employees? At the time, place, and circumstances, they were highly connected to the employment of all of this. Saudi sent them to San Diego, funded him. By the time he started, he's traveling all over the place. Multiple mosques, he was employed. In actual practice, they had a history of employer-employee relationships with these two dudes. Okay, it was very much boss-employee. Turning to whether this tortious act is commonly done, the record is unclear as to where the money came from that was spent on behalf of the hijackers. Yeah, where did it come from? These individuals were Moya propagators, and they shared some similarities with the hijackers, and the last and most important factor clearly favors the plaintiffs as well. And so they have provided evidence that creates the overall impression that these two were not just accountants and imams. Their employment had some connection with assisting the hijackers. They were in direct communication with Saudis during their relevant activities, and they assisted and provided support to the hijackers. They acted within the scope of their employment as employees of Saudi Arabia. Because the factors applicable for the doctrine of vicarious liability, we have met the jurisdictional exceptions. And this is only about jurisdiction, okay? So we're going to allow this to proceed, but it's worth ultimately noting when the question of scope of employment comes in, the fact finder may reach different conclusions. We're just asking about jurisdiction. Now, although there is less evidence about their actions, it's about jurisdiction, and so we can just march forward there. Now, the court bases its above finding records on the evidence that we have reviewed and is uninfluenced by the parties' more generic and conclusory allegations that lack evidentiary support. For example, they say that they hosted a welcome party for the hijackers, but nothing in the video says that the hijackers were the focus of the party. Just looks like a party. Based on the short, infrequent appearances and the very brief introduction, it's overly conclusory. And so the judge, I am being fair and looking at it, here's why you're not 100%. But despite not giving weight to the overly conclusory statements, the court still finds that they offered sufficient evidence to substantiate their material allegations that these were Saudi employees. And ultimately, Saudi Arabia did not satisfy its burden. The court finds that their assertion is lacking. They say, well, no one in the Saudi government actually directed these people. They said, well, that's lacking in force. There's multiple pieces of circumstantial evidence that shows that they were coordinating with the Saudi government and providing assistance to the hijackers. For example, there were several phone calls made between Bayoumi and Thumeiri, between these people and others, right? Everybody's calling each other. Saudi Arabia argues those calls were related to education, requests for religious materials, and other things. It is also unpersuasive given the frequency and the timing of the calls, how the calls between the individuals were made, and it's their burden to show it's not related to the hijackers when it looks like it's related to the hijackers. And lastly, the court finds that their argument is unconvincing, saying, well, they acted on their own. It's not anything that we wanted them to do, and so we're immunized because they were acting outside of the scope of their employment. But the plaintiffs have managed to provide reasonable evidence that these guys were assisting the hijackers from the Saudis, and they did not proffer sufficient evidence to the contrary. And although KSA attempts to offer seemingly innocent explanations, they're either self-contradictory or not strong enough to overcome the claims. Now, they're allowed to prove their case at trial. This is just about jurisdiction. Overall, the parties dispute a significant portion of the facts. They're free to their own interpretations, but there is no dispute as to the dates and locations of the meetings with the hijackers in LA or San Diego. The parties quarrel over whether these were pre-planned or by chance. It's also undisputed that one of these people, Bayoumi, offered various forms of assistance with the hijackers' apartment, brought them to Parkwood where he lived, helped them fill out applications, signed a lease as a guarantor. However, the parties disagree as to the motive. It's undisputed that a notepad page had an airplane drawing, but what's the meaning behind it? Some of the disputed facts cannot be resolved right now, so it has to go forward in trial. Nonetheless, the entire body of undisputed facts and the court's preliminary assessment means we've got jurisdiction here. The court's examination is limited to actual and direct circumstantial reasonable inferences, and the Saudis did not carry their burden to say that they're immune and excluded from jurisdiction here. And so therefore, their motion to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction is denied. The clerk of the court directed to terminate the motion. Thank you to George B. Daniels for that decision.